Good morning. I'm Tara Barney. I'm so happy to have you all with me today. I'm glad you joined us for this conversation. While the room is populating, I'll take just a second to introduce myself. I am the brand new co-CEO of our month and 3-day-year-old organization, the Evansville Regional Economic Partnership. We've casually called ourselves EREP, and we are the amalgamation of the former chamber, the former Economic Development Coalition of Southwest Indiana, and the Growth Alliance for Greater Evansville. And while we are 3 organizations that have come together into one, our new organization is intentional on a few things that are critical to our region. One is a conversation about talent. If we have an 80-20, it's what we are able to do as an organization that has a role in convening conversations around the opportunity for every citizen of this region to build a career with you, our employer community. So today we hope to launch a conversation about how we as a collective group of employers and civic leaders can best enable our talent within this region to be more successful and more able to build careers and great lives in the Southwest Indiana and Greater Evansville region by intentional efforts within our organizations collectively on equity and inclusion and therefore opportunity for our community. So while we are a new organization, we are zealously committed to this conversation, and I want to take this opportunity to thank all of you for making time to join us for this. Making it a personal priority is one of the ways that we will begin to actually demonstrate and become more competent in this space. So this is a priority of our organization and of mine, and I want to just introduce a few folks that are part of making this opportunity come to be today. Jonathan Pope and the Southwestern Indiana YMCA have been my colleagues in this conversation for many, many months, and so the Y's role in this is one that is vast. They are in touch with so much of our community on a day-to-day basis that we appreciate their partnership. Similarly, I want to thank Pat Creech, who you will hear from through the course of this morning. Pat's going to facilitate our conversation, and his day job is the executive director of the Welborn Community Foundation. And so, Pat, thank you so much for being part of today's discussion. And I also want to thank Laura Stevens and Bridge. Bridge has been a champion of conversations about inclusion for many years in our community. But as we get started, I want to just take a few minutes to set the table, if you will. Our intent today is to really begin a conversation that is part of a journey. We've asked you to commit to 3 events. This is a series, and in the course of that series, we will explore what we mean when we talk about, when we use the terms diversity, equitable inclusion, equitable prosperity. There's so many terms that are part of our conversation today, and we want to make sure that we are empowered to understand what they mean and how they offer opportunity to our organizations. Similarly, we want to make sure that you as employers and community leaders have access to best practices and to a bit of a toolkit of some things that might be relevant for your organization. So we will share that with you and offer some insights into that through the course of this series. Today, we're going to talk a good bit about what some of our organizations that are global in scope have been doing in this work for years. We thought this was a great way to start the conversation because the value of equitable inclusion in organizations of global scope can be quite interesting to us as a community. At the same time, it's what works for our community that matters. So we think that today is an opportunity to hear from some organizations that have been invested in this work for several years, probably many years. Lori and Holly and Pat will I'm sure, give us some significant examples of the journey that their organizations and they personally have been on. So I want to offer a couple housekeeping tips for all of you. Because we've got a large group on this call, we've turned off chat. So we welcome your comments. I hope you will share feedback with us, but for the sake of the conversation and to keep us aligned, we've turned off the chat feature today. And we would appreciate it if you would share your camera if you can, because seeing everyone's faces in the course of this conversation is a great opportunity for us. And if you go to that top right corner of your Zoom screen and turn on speaker view. Speaker view will allow a good interaction for each of you as our speakers share their thoughts and talk with us today. So up in the top right corner, you'll find the opportunity to turn on speaker, and I'd encourage you to do that. But without further ado, I'd like to offer a couple thoughts for our conversation today. First, today we're going to hear from some folks that have been at this work in this community for a long time. In July, we're going to come back to you, and we've invited Kara Herring, who is the Chief Equity, Inclusion, and Opportunity Officer for the state of Indiana. That's a brand new post, and Kara is a able talent in this space, and she will share with us what's going on in the landscape of our state and our public sector partners in this work. And then later on in the course of the year, in this fall, we will come back and share some more specific tools and opportunities for you as employers to embed some best practices within your organization. But I couldn't have a greater opportunity to launch this series than to invite Mr. Tom Salmon, who's agreed to kick off this conversation today. I'd like to take just a moment to introduce Tom if I could. Many of you know him as a neighbor, but I want to be completely respectful of the fact that while he is our neighbor, he runs a very global organization that has scope and reach that oftentimes we don't see every day. But Tom is the Chief Executive Officer of Berry Global. He has been since February of 2017. Prior to that role, he served as the Chief Operating Officer for Berry Global since 2016. And before that, he headed up Consumer Packaging Division for Berry and the Rigid Closed Top Division from 14 through 15, and the Engineered Materials Division from 3 through 14. Why do I tell you all that? Because this man knows plastics. He also knows the scope and reach of the role of that element in our world. And if you haven't been to the Berry website, go there sometime, because you will learn a great deal about what's going on in the industry and recycling. That's my sales pitch for you, sir. But I want to just share a thought with you. While he has come to our community from his early start in Western New York, where he has a BA from St. Bonaventure, this is a gentleman who runs a global company, and we are proud to have it headquartered here in the Evansville region. I think every night when he pulls into his driveway and ends his day, he's probably thinking about 1,000 things. And yet Tom Salmon thinks every day about our community, and he is involved in our community. And if you've not engaged with him, I'd be surprised, because he also serves on the Evansville Regional Business Committee. He is involved with Golf Gives Back, which is a great organization that hosts the Corn Ferry Championship here. He's on the board of Old National Bank Corp. Most important to many of us, he's on the board of SIG School and commits his time to that, and he serves with Cook Enterprises. So Tom has made many commitments to our region, but one of those that's most relevant to us today is to be with us to kick off our conversation. So Mr. Salmon, thank you. It's an honor to have you with us today.
Thanks, Tara, and thanks everybody for joining this morning. Congratulations also on the formation of EREP. I think it's a great opportunity to help advance the causes of the community and the business community forward. You know, when I received this invitation, I gladly accepted. You know, as Tara said, we are a global Fortune 500 company. We were fortunate yesterday to announce our earnings. So we have every quarter we'll announce earnings. The company was, you know, very fortunate to, you know, deliver record earnings, you know, in our history yesterday. But it was interesting. The cornerstone of our theme in terms of what makes Berry, you know, successful. You know, we talked about diversity of our portfolio and diversity of our people. We talked about the fact that, you know, part of the cornerstone of how we go to market is what we call local value delivery capability. Berry has 47,000 employees around the world. We do business in 6 continents. So by nature, you know, we're diverse, but it's absolutely something that we continue to have to develop and evolve in and around. And this conversation today is so important, and I'm passionate about it because for this community to thrive, for Evansville community and the region around it to survive and thrive, it has to be attractive to a diverse population. Without it, our economic vitality, will ultimately be stymied, and we can't have that. And this is a great first step. We've got 191 participants this morning, looking to learn more, to become involved, to become engaged. But the next step is really, as we learn, take action. I think about how welcoming our community needs to be in order to compete for that diverse population that we all desire. Because that diverse population helps us be more creative, helps us be more competitive, and will help us thrive as individual businesses and ultimately as a region and a geography. And I think what's so important for us is to be honest with ourselves and ask ourselves, are we creating a community that is truly welcoming, that is providing various aspects of work, competitiveness, as well as non-work activities that would be attractive to a global citizen? And that's the degree to which we've got to start thinking about this ultimately to allow and drive population growth into this region that's diverse, that will allow us to compete effectively. Make no mistake about it, Evansville is not the only region in geography that wants to grow and wants to attract businesses. So what are we going to do that's different? What are we going to do, that's unique? At Berry, we clearly find that, through diversity, we're getting better ideas, more creative ideas, and frankly, it allows our organization to look and feel like the consumers that we actually serve. And without it going forward, we're going to fall behind. The innovation on our teams has to be a collective effort. It has to be a collective effort from people's interests, likes, dislikes, experiences. And if we don't ultimately foster that in the form of the diversity of the population that breeds and creates those types of innovative solutions, they're not going to be as competitive, they're not going to be as interesting, they're not going to be as attractive. And so for us, it absolutely is something that has to drive us each and every day. Many people ask and say to me, Tom, with 47,000 employees, how do you touch them? And I can't possibly touch all 47,000, but I will tell you, pre-pandemic, I would spend 30 to 35% of my time physically in our manufacturing sites, so that I had the opportunity to walk the floor, engage in conversations, give people the opportunity to meet me, and for me to assess our level of engagement that those people had in terms of helping us be successful and drive customer success. This is something that we'll get back into, we'll re-engage. We take the time and effort that just last month, we'll reach out and make certain that on a global basis, personally pick up the phone, contact, and I contacted 96 employees in 3 days, where we reached out to those high-performing, diverse candidates that we have around the world, recognize their achievements, get their input on what we can do differently, what we can do better, how we can become more attractive as an employer and truly be an employer of choice. So don't ever minimize the type of impact that you can have. Take the personal involvement, be personally engaged, take the chance to ultimately be uncomfortable and ask people about what's it like, to work in Evansville. Is it a welcoming community? Is there an opportunity ultimately that you would recommend for your friends to ultimately come and work and be part of this community, to ultimately allow it and help it grow? There's a lot we can do. And we have to be very steadfast and aggressive in our approach, because the quality of the place, the diversity of the options that we have for people to live, to work, to worship, to be part of the community has to look like a broader cross-section of this country and of this world. And if we do that effectively, we're going to have no concerns about attracting population to the area to become a region of choice. Without it, we're going to struggle to maintain and manage our population and get businesses to grow and increase, their operations in these areas and or move them here. I think it's a great opportunity. I'm personally thrilled with the formation of this, of the Evansville, Regional Economic Partnership to help drive this, to help lead this in collaboration with the businesses around the region. I assure you that we're committed to it, as Barry. And think about that. We're a 47,000 person organization that happens to be headquartered here. And if I want to move people to this geography, it has to reflect, what my organization globally looks like. Over 40% of our business resides outside the United States. But ultimately, we'll want to filter people through this geography. And it has to have the ability to embrace them, make them feel welcomed, and give them the opportunities to prosper both personally and professionally. So looking forward to the discussion today. I think it's amazingly topical, but it can create a competitive advantage for our community and for the businesses that reside in this community to ultimately thrive well into the future. So Tara, thank you, and looking forward to the day.
And thank you, sir, for being with us. And your comments were so on target. They couldn't have gotten our attention any more specifically, but we appreciate you sharing your perspective with us. And we certainly appreciate all that Berry Global does to not only enhance this community, but I'll go so far as to say to enhance the world. I am thrilled to introduce my professional colleague, friend, and someone who's been an inspiration to me in understanding and taking my own personal journey in how I am more knowledgeable about some of the work in the equity and inclusion space, and that is Mr. Pat Creech. So I'm going to turn this program over to Pat. He has agreed to facilitate our conversation this morning. Pat has been in the role of executive director for the Welborn Foundation for a couple years now, I believe, Pat, and it's right. Certainly an organization that has a huge impact in our region. Thank you, Pat, for being with us, and I'm turning this over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Tara. I appreciate all you have done to help make this series get off the ground. And good morning and welcome to everybody that's tuned in this morning. It's really an honor to be with you today and serving as facilitator of the panel discussion. I've had the opportunity to chat with both of our panelists offline in the past few weeks, and if just a fraction of what they shared with me comes out today, I know you'll all be blessed and we'll all be better for hearing what they have to share with us. So let me start by introducing our panelists this morning. Lori Sutton is the Director of Corporate Human Resources and Director of Global Diversity and Inclusion at Berry Global Corporation. Lori received her bachelor's degree in accounting from the University of Southern Indiana. She also received her MBA from Indiana Wesleyan. She holds several certifications, including, Certified Diversity Executive and Certified Diversity Professional. Lori has also received several awards, both locally and internationally, for her work in diversity, inclusion, and equity. She currently serves on the board of directors for the University of Evansville Center for Innovation and Change, the Evansville Teachers Federal Credit Union, Ascension St. Vincent Evansville Foundation, and the Girl Scouts of Southwest Indiana. Holly Sanders is the Human Resources Business Director for AstraZeneca Mount Vernon. She has over 15 years experience in HR in the steel, petrochemicals, and pharmaceutical industries. Holly holds a master's degree in industrial organizational psychology from Western Kentucky University and worked for 4 years in mental health before transitioning to human resources. Holly has built a passion for diversity, equity, and inclusion as she has spent the past several years reading, listening, and learning. She believes people operate at their best in diversity-rich environments and is driven to share her learnings with others in this space. Lori and Holly, I want to welcome you and thank you in advance for joining the discussion and for sharing your experiences and insights with us all. In my discussions with each of you, it became clear that understanding how diversity, equity, and inclusion benefits business is a journey and not a one and done initiative. Holly, I want to lead off with you. What kind of encouragement might you have for an organization that is just starting down this path? Holly?
Thanks, Pat. Thanks for the good welcome, and thanks everybody for being here today. It's really a pleasure to have an opportunity to talk to fellow leaders in the business community about this important topic. So if you're thinking about starting an I&D journey at your organization, the best bit of encouragement I would have for you is to say, just do it. It is worth it. It is difficult work sometimes, and we're going to talk about that a lot today, and some of the challenges that you might face. We're going to talk about that today as well. But it is absolutely worth it. It's worth it from a human standpoint because it's the right thing to do. And it's also worth it from a financial standpoint. You can look at any number of statistics and find out how much better organizations perform when there are diverse teams. There's a statistic out there that says that diverse teams make 87% better decisions. That's phenomenal. You can look at any number of different stats or researches or reports and find numerous examples to support this as a business decision for your organization. One thing I would say, though, is if you are starting to really realize that it is a journey, I don't think anybody, I don't care how long you've been working in the inclusion and diversity space or how many years you've tried to learn and do personal reflection in this area, there's always something more to learn. And I don't think any of us ever arrive. And so that's one of the things that I would say. This is not an event. This is not a one and done. It's not something that you can lean on your HR team and think that HR needs to own this. This really has to be something that is owned by the business and that is woven into the fabric of your organization. And I think we'll have an opportunity to talk a little bit more today about, how you might go about doing that. But
Thanks very much, Holly. Appreciate that great lead off. Lori, question for you. You were at Vectren, now CenterPoint Energy, prior to serving at Berry Global. What did the early steps in this space on this journey look like for Vectren?
Yeah, thank you so much, Pat, and good morning, everyone. And as Holly said, thank you so much for being here. One of the things I think you will find is that Holly and I will probably say some of the same things, but we're going to do the best that we can to support each other through these questions. So when I was at Vectren, we began our journey in 2008. And like Holly said, it is not a sprint, it is a journey. And in order for you to be effective, you have to ensure that you're looking at different aspects of diversity, inclusion, and equity. And sometimes our immediate thing that we want to focus on is attraction and retention in people. But at the end of the day, you have to think about the culture. You have to ensure that you're creating the right culture for people to thrive. And so when we began at Vectren, we looked at different aspects, but the one thing to impact the culture is we wanted to do awareness training. You have to provide individuals with what does this mean and where do they fit into this picture? Because if you automatically out the gate start excluding individuals, then you're not building an inclusive culture. And so we started out with identifying a diversity action council, that was the name at that time, but a council, and then moving into awareness training, because you want to ensure that individuals understand what diversity, inclusion, and equity means for your organization. And those terms are used interchangeably, but that is definitely what you want to start when you begin your journey.
Thanks very much, Lori. One of the things that listeners have probably already encountered this morning is a variety of terms. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that right now. There's lots of terms in this diversity, equity, inclusion space. And excuse me, they can truly be quite confusing. Yesterday, just as a test, I Googled diversity, equity, and inclusion terms and landed on a website that had a short list in the form of a glossary that had 170 different terms on it. So for the sake of our discussion, to kind of create a starting point in developing a common language, if you will, we've identified 4 terms that we thought we might want to explain and unpack just a little bit. The first is diversity. And the way we've defined that is diversity is simply a range of difference or variety. This could be racial diversity, could be gender diversity, could be abilities diversity, and there's, of course, many other forms of diversity. Equity, as contrasted to equality, means fair and just. It also, in this space, has a specific meaning around the idea of accessibility. Equality, we can generally think of as meaning the same or having sameness. Inclusion, we can think of as the idea of being brought into or inside or included. Now, one of the things that is often misunderstood is this idea between the differences between equity and equality. So I want to ask both Lori and Holly to comment on that a little bit. Lori, if equality is the same, tell us why equity is different from sameness.
Mm-hmm. So like you did with the definitions, you can also go out and Google equity versus equality, and it'll give you a visual representation. And sometimes that's a little bit easier to understand. But if we think about just some of the systemic issues that are within our society, equity is when you acknowledge that everyone is not starting at the same point. There are situations or circumstances that may have not provided them the opportunities that others may have had. And so when you really embrace equity, it's where you acknowledge those circumstances, but you're trying to get to an equal outcome. And so oftentimes individuals, they'll say, well, I want everyone to be treated equally. You can see that even in the pandemic today, where now hospitals and organizations that are helping with the vaccine, they are providing opportunities and they're going to where people are and providing them with the vaccine. And so that is a great demonstration today of breaking down barriers, because when you think about equity, you have to ensure you're breaking down barriers for individuals. And so if I think about the business world and we think about putting individuals in non-traditional roles. So let's just say there's a role within your organization where predominantly it is male dominated, but you want to provide diversity, whether it's race, gender, sexual orientation, whatever it is. You may need to hold some type of workforce readiness session in order to bring those individuals up to speed, or you can help them in, we have several within our community, Ivy Tech, who have programs. And so if individuals do not know about these opportunities, then how can you diversify your workforce? And so when you think about equity, it's really removing those barriers, but you're trying to get to an equal outcome for everyone.
Thank you, Lori. I know in our previous conversations, we talked as well about the idea that equality is having an open door to everyone or to a broad group of people. Equity acknowledges that not everybody is the same distance to the door, right? So that can influence our thinking and actions in that space. Holly, how important has it been for AstraZeneca to create a common vocabulary within the organization?
Yeah, I think it is. I think it is very important, and I'm going to try to do a little illustration on equity and equality. I'm going to see how this works out with a virtual audience and no picture here. So I'm going to ask you to use your imaginations for a second. So Lori did an amazing job explaining the differences between equity and equality, and this is something that we've had a hard time really helping people to understand as a part of the journey. And one of the most impactful images that I have seen, I'm going to try to describe to you without you actually seeing it. So put your imagination caps on for me for just a second. So let's imagine for a second that we have 3 boys and they're standing in front of a fence and they're trying to see a baseball game. One boy is 6 foot tall, one boy is 5 feet tall, and one boy is 4 feet tall. The 6 foot tall boy can see the baseball game right now. The 5 foot boy is just shy of being able to see the baseball game. And the 4 foot boy doesn't even really realize there's a baseball game happening out on the field. And so equality would say, let's give every one of those boys a box to stand on so that they can see the baseball game. So we put the 6 foot boy on a box and now he's really high. He already was seeing the game. We put the 5 foot boy on a box. Now he can see the game. That was what he needed. We put the 4 foot boy on the box. He still can't see the game. That's equality. We gave everyone the same box. Equity is we give people what they need. So the 4 foot boy might need 2 boxes. The 5 foot boy only needed the 1 box, and the 6 foot boy never needed a box at all because he already was able to see the game. And so to me, that image was really the most powerful thing when I was trying to help other people come along and understand the differences between equity and equality. So I hope that that worked to give you guys that picture without seeing the picture. And maybe that could be something that you could use as well if you're trying to describe this to someone else. But one more comment I would like to bring out with regard to language and terminology. One thing that I've found is that sometimes barriers to even opening a discussion about diversity, equity, inclusion is that people are afraid because they don't know the right terminology. They're not sure. How do I refer to people of color? Do I say African American? Do I say Black? Do I say, person of color? What is the appropriate way to even open a conversation about some of these topics? And so people shy away because they don't want to offend or because they don't feel like they're educated enough. And so that is very foundational when you're starting a journey to open up these uncomfortable conversations, is really helping people understand the differences, like we talked about earlier, between some of these terms, but also giving people permission to have conversations with each other to say, is this the way that you would like me to refer to you? Or is this the proper terminology? And kind of giving everyone grace as we're all learning and going through this together. And so I think that's really important. And then the final thing I'll say when we're talking about terminology, this is not really terminology, but it sparked this thought in my mind. A lot of times, another barrier that I see is that somebody, let's say, is a part of your organization who's from a different country, or they don't even have to be from a different country, but maybe they have a name that's difficult to pronounce. People will not, they just won't use that person's name because it's difficult to pronounce. Or maybe they'll say, hey, I know your name is, whatever, but can I just call you Bob? Because I can't say that, that's not okay. We need to ask the person, how do you pronounce your name? And then we need to, practice in the mirror or whatever it takes. But, calling people by their name, that is so basic. And trying to make sure that people feel valued in your organization. If you're not even getting their name right, how much value do they think that you have for them? And so that's another one that's sort of a pet peeve of mine. And so I just threw that in there for free.
Thank you very much, Holly. What you're describing there really is kind of the cultural fabric that surrounds the sometimes very practical initiatives, programmings, and learnings that move both the individuals in an organization and the company itself forward in this diversity, equity, and inclusion journey, and super, super important. Laura, I just want to ask you if you have a follow-up to Holly's comments regarding the culture shaping components of this journey.
Yeah, and the visual that Holly described, just one more thing to add is when you talk about equity, you have to ensure that you're also thinking about the systemic things that may be included with that. And so the next step in that is Holly described the boxes, but if you remove the barriers that are in front of the fence, then that's the ultimate goal. Now, as a society, it's going to take us quite some time to get there, but that's okay. If that's what we're striving for, is to make the view clear and remove the barriers, then you will achieve true equity, and that takes time. But just to add to what Holly said, I have daughters who have names that are unique. They are very unique, and that is a pet peeve of mine as well. And so I always share with individuals, it's okay to say, I apologize, put a disclaimer before it. When it comes to building this culture, even for me, I've been in this space since 2008. I am learning every day. It's a journey. As you can see in society, there are things, if someone would have told me that what we're going through right now, we always say we have several pandemics going on currently, I would not have believed it. This is 2021. I definitely would not have believed what we're going through. And so you have to be vulnerable in this space. And you have to understand that there is something for all of us to learn. And the other thing is ensuring that when you're having these conversations, there's two sides to every story, and we know the truth is in the middle. And so your perspective is not the only perspective, and you have to be open to that. And sometimes I think within our organizations, we begin to close our minds because we don't know where we fit in. And instead of being vulnerable and joining the conversation, we tend to shy away from it. And so that's the best advice I can give you, is that we're all starting from some point. There are no organizations that will raise their hand and say, yes, I've got this on lock and key. I can do, we are the best of the best, because at the end of the day, the world is changing. And as an organization, like Tom mentioned before, if you don't evolve with it, you will be behind. And then that will discourage individuals for wanting to join your organization and even accessing your services. And so you want to be proactive and not reactive, because what is happening currently, unfortunately, I think it's wonderful when organizations put out statements. It could be the Me Too movement, it could be the Asian hate, it could be Black Lives Matter. I mean, I can go on and on. But the thing that is important is people are watching, and you can put out a statement, but if you're not doing anything to support that statement, then that discourages individuals. And so just ensure, and it could be something small that you're putting in place. Making a step is making progress, no matter how small it is.
And Lori, over time, these steps that organizations and individuals involved take often involved adopting and putting in place principles and best practices that other organizations have learned and implemented over a number of years. But you told me that, and I quote, principles and best practices can be applied differently in different organizations. Talk a little bit more about that, and why is that idea, again, it's the one size doesn't fit all idea. Why is that important for organizations to understand, regardless of where they are on this journey?
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I have found with this profession is that most DEI professionals, we feel that we are in this together. And so you will see individuals always sharing best practices within their organization. And so when I think about moving from Vectren to Berry, those are two different organizations. And what worked well at Vectren may not work well at Berry. But it's one of those things where you want to make sure that you have the foundation. And so when you're thinking about the industry, you think about where you're located, because when I think about Berry, we're in 6 continents, and what works in the US may not work in Europe, Asia, wherever. And so I really feel that when you're thinking about implementing an initiative, because I don't like to call them programs, I like to call them initiatives because that seems more effective. And so when you're thinking about implementing an initiative, you have to think about what's going to work best for your organization. What is the readiness of your organization? Because if you try to leapfrog the foundational things, it's going to end up where it's not sustainable. And that's what you have to think about. The awareness training, I cannot emphasize that enough, because you, Pat, like you shared in the beginning, the definitions, making sure everyone understands what diversity means for your organization, because what fits Barry may not fit AstraZeneca. But at the end of the day, we're all trying to reach the same goal. And so I encourage individuals to reach out to your networks, expand your networks, so that you can find out what will work best for your organization.
Thank you very much, Lori. Holly, would you share some of the practical and positive results that improving DEI and AstraZeneca has brought to the company? And as you do that, share some of the programming and initiatives that were designed to more fully integrate DEI into the culture and processes of the company. Keep in mind, audience, today is not designed to give you the toolbox of best practices that you might borrow from. That'll come later in the fall session. But again, we're just trying to create some awareness of some of these kind of initiatives and actions. So Holly?
Yeah, so I'll start out kind of telling you, and this is very high level, but some of the initiatives or programs that we have in place at AstraZeneca, and then I'll talk about the benefits later, or if I forget that, Pat, remind me. But I think maybe it's helpful to sort of set the landscape for you about how we've structured, and we say I&D. So here's another example of terminology. So at AstraZeneca, we call it I&D, which is, inclusion and diversity. So if I say that, that's what I'm talking about. We have a global inclusion and diversity council that is chaired by the CEO of our company. And then that cascades to a regional inclusion and diversity council. As Lori mentioned, what works for one country is not necessarily going to work for the next country. And so it's very important to take not just a global look, but also to take a regional look at what works. And to be quite frank, what works in Mount Vernon, Indiana may not work in other areas of the United States either. And then beyond that, we also have 12 what we call BRGs. That stands for Business Resource Groups. Some companies, I think, might call those affinity groups. And those are available to any employee in the US who wants to join. So what those groups do, there's a BRG for Asian American and Pacific Islander, for example. And if you don't know, May is Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. So if you're not celebrating that, get on the party with that this month. But anyway, so there's one for working parents, there's one for disabilities, and that's a place where people can get together and they can have conversations about issues that may be unique to them, and talk about ways to, advance their careers and things like that. We also have a wealth of training that is open on demand to any employee at any time. So we use a platform called Degreed. And then within Degreed, it links to a lot of other learning platforms. There's so much training available to employees that, you could sit down and probably take a couple of years to get through all that training. But one of the things that we've done at the site level that I wanted to share today is we implemented something last year during our Power of Diversity Week, which is another thing we do. We have a whole week where we celebrate diversity, and we have a lot of different activities during that week to support that. But at the Mount Vernon site, we implemented something that we're calling I&D moments. And this has really caught on in other areas of the company. And I think we're kind of doing this across the enterprise now. we had traditionally done safety moments at the beginning of meetings to set the tone for safety and get people's minds focused around safety. And so we thought, hey, why don't we do an inclusion and diversity moment at the beginning of our meetings too? If we really want to embed inclusion and diversity, if we really want to make this a part of how we work, if we really want to open up communication lines to have these uncomfortable conversations, let's talk about it every day. Let's put it at the beginning of meetings. And so we've done that. And any employee can bring the inclusion and diversity moment for that meeting. And it can be about any topic related to inclusion and diversity. And that has really opened up a lot of lines of communication that were previously, quite frankly, closed. And there was no great avenue for people to have those conversations within their small teams. And so that's something that we did recently that I think it was very easy to implement. Anybody could go implement that tomorrow. But it really has had a big impact on the culture at the site and people's willingness to talk about inclusion and diversity. And so when you ask about what we've seen as a result of some of the efforts, I think that one of the most powerful things that we have seen is opening these lines of communication. You know, years ago, well-meaning HR folks told people, hey, you don't talk about this stuff at work, right? You don't talk about religion and you don't talk about things like race and, you know, the workplace, that's not the place for this. And what we have gotten smarter about over the years is that whether we're talking about them at work or not, these are the lived experiences of the people who are coming to work every day. And so they're thinking about them. It's on their mind. They're talking about it to their co-workers and their friends and their neighbors. And so if we're not talking about this at work, we're really, really missing the boat and we're missing a good opportunity. And so I hope anyway, that we don't have situations anymore at AstraZeneca where employees try to bring these topics up to their managers and managers say, hey, we can't talk about that at work. And to me, you know, I think that that's one of the most powerful things because it starts to build trust within the organization. And if you can build trust and you can make people feel valued, then that opens the door for all the other things that you want, right? The culture that you want, the morale that you want, the engagement that you want within the organization. And so to me, it's really about building trust. And I think that that's really the best thing that we've gotten from all of our I&D work so far.
Thank you, Holly. As a follow-up to your comments, you shared with me, and I quote, all we do is tied back to and talked about how D&I impacts business and the bottom line. It's about the bottom line. Share more about the business case for diversity and inclusion. And I want to give you an opportunity to share a little bit more about how it's more than a business case. It's about business culture. So just share a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so in 2020, we did a 4-part series with all the people leaders at the Mount Vernon site. And we started, like Lori said, we started with awareness training and we were building a foundation as we went. And we gradually worked our way up to some more meaty topics, you know, like subtle acts of exclusion or microaggressions or privilege and things like that. But we started, you know, building that foundation, and all along the way, everything we did, we tied it back to why it's important for the business, why it's important at work. I would love to change the hearts and minds of people to where when they leave AstraZeneca, they go out into the community and they do great work in the community and they really pick this up as a passion. I would love for that to happen, but I haven't found that magic wand yet. So Lori, if you've got it somewhere, share it with me because I haven't found it yet. But what I can do, or what I feel like we can influence, is what people do when they're at work and how they interact with each other while they're at work. And the hope is that once we get that right, that some of that will transfer and some of that will become internalized and that people will pick up that passion. And we're seeing that. But at the end of the day, even if you don't want to get involved in inclusion and diversity efforts because it's the right thing to do or because it's, you know, the human thing to do, it is absolutely the right thing to do from a business standpoint. You know, I shared the statistic with you earlier about 87% diverse teams make 87% better decisions. The other thing that you look at is that companies who have gender parity or close to gender parity, their profits are 47% higher than companies who do not have gender parity. Who would not want to get on board with that? 47%, that's crazy, right? If somebody told you that if you implemented a new software in your company, you would have 47% higher profits, there wouldn't be a company that didn't own that software. And so, I would encourage you to look for yourself about the statistics that are out there that show how much better companies perform, how much greater profits companies have when they embed inclusion and diversity principles into the organization. So again, if we can't win you over because it's the right thing to do, I hope that it will connect that this makes business sense. There is a real business case for making sure that you have diverse teams, making sure that people are using their energy when they are at work to do their jobs, right? When we don't have inclusive environments, when people don't feel like they belong, when they don't feel like they can bring their whole self to work, they're wasting a lot of energy on non-productive things, right? They're wasting a lot of energy thinking about, how do I fit in? How can I assimilate in this culture? When we can get rid of that and free people up to just do their job and be their whole self at work, that really unleashes and unlocks so much potential.
Yeah, that potential both inside the company then flows into personal life and then flows into the community. Thank you very much.
That's the hope.
Lori, many of us might tend to view diversity and inclusion as a quote unquote hiring and promoting issues. But both your companies, Lori and Holly, have engaged employees all the way down to the frontline worker level in diversity, equity, and inclusion. Lori, can you give us an example of what that has looked like in your experience at Berry or even at Vectren?
Yeah, so I would like to address a couple of things in my answer. So when I think about how you can impact all the way down to the frontline employee, you have to think about diversity and inclusion and equity as strategic. One of the things that we all know, what gets measured gets done. And so if you don't think strategically about this, it's just a bunch of words on a page, it's just a bunch of people talking. But when you really think strategically about it, you will be able to make, it will be sustainable. And so when I think about Berry, what we have done is similar to Holly, we have employee resource groups and they are international. And so we want to ensure that we're not only impacting, in Evansville because we're headquartered here, but also making sure we're impacting all of our employees. And like Tom said, it's hard to reach all 47,000 employees. But if we have a strategic initiative where we have identified how can we impact not only the frontline employee, but anyone who is a stakeholder for Berry. And so we've identified that we have 4 areas that we would like to focus on. And this, because it is a journey, it's always aspirational, but these are the things that we want to address. And so I don't know, not one organization that does not want to have a positive employee experience. So Holly did speak to a lot of the things that they're doing to create that positive employee experience. And you can gauge that by an engagement survey, performance evaluations when you're having discussions with individuals, through your councils, through your employee resource groups, activities, and just a number of things that you can do. So positive employee experience is definitely part of the equation and one of the things that we all want to impact. And then also attraction and retention. Sometimes I think that organizations may focus too much on the hiring because you do want a diverse workforce, because that does bring innovation, creativity, which leads to profitability and growth. But the thing about it is, you want to make sure that you're taking care of your top talent that's already there. And so you have to have a balance when you're attracting, because you also want to make sure you're retaining that top talent. And then you move into your customers and suppliers, because we need those individuals to be successful in our organization. And so we want to make sure that what's important to us as an organization is also important to our customers and our suppliers. And then if we do all of those things, we can impact the community. we want to make sure that as employees of Berry that we are serving in the various communities. And if you think about that, 6 continents, how we can make a global impact. I mean, when I think about that, it's almost, I can't even wrap my mind around it, because we have the opportunity to not only impact the lives of 47,000 individuals, but also the communities in which they live and work and serve. And so this goes back to a previous question. Those are the areas that we focus on at Berry, but those may not be the areas of focus for you. And so it's really stepping back and looking at who are we as an organization? Because if your diversity and inclusion strategy is not aligned to the strategy of the overall organization, it is not going to thrive. And that's really making sure that you have engagement from the top. The initiatives around this topic cannot be successful if it's from the bottom up. Oftentimes I talk to friends and individuals who are trying to get things started in their organizations. And the first thing I tell them is make sure you talk to your senior executives. And when I came to Berry, I was so impressed with the level of engagement with the senior executives. You know, Tom did speak about where he goes out and speaks to employees. And I think it was like my 2nd or 3rd month that I was there, I had an opportunity to go on a visit with him. And, you know, knowing that you are going to sit down with the CEO of the company and you're a frontline employee, that can be, even for me, you know, that can be a little nerve-wracking. But he provides a space where they can share anything that they would like. And not only did I participate, but our CHRO participated in the visit as well. And so having the individual who, you know, we all own the culture, but our chief human resources officer, you know, in HR, we're responsible along with the business to own the culture. I mean, that is a huge impact for someone to make on the organization. And so I would end my response with, think about it as a strategy. It should be part of the fabric of your organization and not just something sitting off to the side. It has to be aligned to what you are trying to accomplish as an overall organization.
Thank you, Lori. So if I could recap the strategy component of your great comments, the evolution perhaps within an organization starts from a very practical level, but over time, DEI strategy includes supplier relationships, workforce relationships, community action and relationships, in addition to the very basics of hiring, promoting, and creating internal equitable and diverse and inclusive workforces.
Right.
Now, Holly and Lori, both of you have been describing what might sound to some as some very large in scope diversity and inclusion initiatives. I mean, you both are with very successful large global companies. Speak to a minute to those in the audience who might be from small to mid-sized companies here in the community, who might be wondering how in the world can we even get started on a journey like that? Our resources aren't the same, our capacities aren't yet the same. What would you say to the leaders from the small and mid-sized companies who are listening today? Obviously, they're interested. Help them get their bearing in this conversation.
Do you want me to go first?
Or go ahead, Holly, please.
So first of all, I would say I don't think there's ever been a better time to dive in than we have right now. We have a climate right now where people seem to be more ready and open right now to talking about inclusion and diversity and holding ourselves accountable for some of the things that we've been talking about today. So because of that, there are a lot of resources that are available that are not super expensive. They're not going to blow your budget and things like that. There's actually a really good book that I tell everybody about. I'm going to have to start seeing if I can get some kind of royalties or something from the sale of this book. I don't know if you guys can see this on my camera. I think it's coming out blurry, but it's called We Can't Talk About That at Work. It's written by a lady named Mary Frances Winters. And this book, if you could see, you would see that I have bookmarks and notes and highlights all through this book. This is one of the best books that I've read on how to really implement in very practical, meaningful ways some of the things that we've been talking about today. And, you know, this book probably cost $15. So I think that sometimes, though, it is worth investing in well, not sometimes, I think it is absolutely worth investing in inclusion and diversity. And there are a lot of external consultants that you can partner with and that can help you develop the strategy. Lori talked a lot about strategy. And I think that that's key, whether you're a large company or whether you're a small company. If you don't, you know, this is, so at AstraZeneca, inclusion and diversity is on, it's a part of our goals and objectives. So everyone has, as part of their goals and objectives, some element of inclusion and diversity. When we look at our 2025 vision and our 2025 strategy for AstraZeneca, inclusion and diversity is a part of that strategy. There are 6 must-wins for every site that are specific to inclusion and diversity. And so whether you're a small company or whether you're a large company, you have a strategy. I'm sure you have goals and objectives. I'm sure you have KPIs or some kind of metrics that you're looking at. Pull inclusion and diversity into that. We've already talked about what great business case there is for inclusion and diversity. And so I think it's just absolutely essential. But as far as resources to get you started, I mean, I know that as a part of this series, there's going to be a toolkit at the end that's provided to employers. I would say that would be a good place to start. And you would be amazed at what you can find through TED Talks and just, you know, Google searches and looking at books like that book by Mary Frances Winters that I talked about. There are just so many great resources out there right now that are pretty easy to get your hands on.
Thank you very much, Holly. Lori, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would say at the end, you know, start with a conversation. It's that simple. If someone starts the conversation, you can go from there. And I have seen, and it's just like when I was at Veteran, and even when Barry started their initiatives prior to me coming, it started with one person kind of raising their hand and saying, this is important to me, and I think that it should be important to us. And no matter how small or how large an organization is, if you can get a group of individuals to sit down and think about, what is it that we want to do as an organization? What do we feel, where do we think we can make the most impact? And it may be your clients or your customers. It may not start off with attraction of diverse individuals, but if you start off with attraction, you can bring that perspective, hopefully, to the conversation. But like Holly said, there are, a couple of months ago, LinkedIn shared an article that careers in diversity and inclusion is the #1 most recruited job right now. And with that, there are so many resources available. I'm one that I like to do research. I like to read, but sometimes I don't have time to read. And so I do a lot of research. I read a lot of articles, TED Talks. I love TED Talks. One of my mentors introduced TED to me several years ago, but I love TED Talks. But at the end of the day, just access your resources. You know, there are several people within the community that work in this space. Accessing them, have a conversation. And don't be afraid to say, I have no idea of where to start, because at the end of the day, we all started there. At Veteran, we didn't know what we were doing. And I'm sure at Barry, they didn't know. And so, but it started with one person raising their hand and saying, hey, I want to have this conversation. And to Holly's point, I don't know a lot of individuals who are in the leadership teams within organizations that don't want to talk about it. And at the end of the day, I think it comes down to individuals don't know where to start. And so they decide not to start. And that's really not an option for you to be sustainable and for you to attract employees, customers, clients. But it's just as simple for me is starting with a conversation.
Thank you very much, Lori. I have one final question for each of you. You know, Tom set the table very well in demonstrating the importance of having buy-in from senior level leadership. And that would be intuitive for most of us as we think about how companies need to drive significant change or important initiatives. What would you say to mid-level influencers in organizations where perhaps senior level leadership is not yet moving these kind of initiatives forward for a variety of reasons? But what would you say to that middle level influencer on what should they do? They think it's important. Any advice for them about how to advance the discussion in their organizations?
So I would say do your research. So Holly gave a substantial amount of metrics and research. So I think it's Harvard Business Review and McKinsey. McKinsey puts out so many reports around, I think they have 3 currently. And so as a leader in an organization, your role is to ensure that the company is there today and tomorrow. And so speaking to them in their language is helpful. And so when you can bring evidence of why this is important and really demonstrating the business case, at the end of the day, I know we all say that it's the right thing to do, but it's not the right thing to do if that's all you're saying is it's the right thing to do. And so you have to bring the research, and that's really thinking about it more strategically, because if you can bring things that from a leader's perspective is important to them, because if you think about it, you know, Tom, our senior executives and our board, they are making the decisions for 47,000 people. And so they have a lot of hats that they have to wear. And so if you're bringing the research, the business case from an overall perspective, I think that would be helpful. And so I would suggest going out to McKinsey. There's some great reports there. And also, you know, Harvard Business Review has several different things that they have published. But research does show that companies that embrace diversity, inclusion, and equity initiatives, they will outperform their peers in so many different metrics. And so I don't know not one leader that would not be interested in that conversation.
Great. Thanks very much, Lori. Holly, any final thoughts from you?
Yeah, I agree with everything that Lori just said. And I think, you know, just one small build to that, I would say that I would also encourage people to do what's within your control. So if you're a mid-level manager, that means you are a manager. You probably have people that are reporting to you. And sometimes the best thing that we can do is to lead by example and, you know, show others the value proposition. And so if you can't get that buy-in from the senior leaders within your remit, prove them wrong. Be the pilot, be the case study for why this is important and why this works. And then, you know, go back for that second conversation to say, hey, you know, kind of the proof is in the pudding, and this is what we're seeing, and this is what we're experiencing as a result. And the other thing I think is being open-minded and flexible, right? We've talked about that a lot today. One size does not fit all. Customized approaches are important. This is a space where, you know, Lori said, those of us that work in this space, we love to share, and that's absolutely true. In fact, I already asked Lori if she'll go to lunch one day so we can talk some more about this. But I would hazard to guess that there are going to be things that Lori and I see differently, because that's sort of the beauty of this space that we're working in. And so just because you don't see completely eye to eye with your senior leader, don't give up. And do what you can that's within your control, and let people around see the difference that that'll make. And I think it'll be contagious.
Great. Thank you very much, Holly. And Lori, thank you as well. You both have just given us a lot to think about, a lot to chew on this morning. We appreciate your experience and pouring into us this morning during this panel discussion. Thanks again. Tara, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you, Lori. Thank you, Holly. You are so inspiring. I've got to say, I'm taking notes fast and furious here, but someone wiser than me said that this all proceeds at the speed of trust. And so if one thing came from this conversation for me, it's the importance of us as community leaders or community influencers, you know, whichever we land in, we have the opportunity to not only seek to build trust, but to demonstrate it every day. So I'm walking away from this as the co-CEO of a brand new organization. And I want to acknowledge and thank my colleague, Greg Wathen, who is my partner in crime in this new venture, because between the two of us, we've got very diverse opinions, and I hope that makes us 87% more productive as a new organization. It's certainly our intention to be. I will commit this to you. We're going to be not just leading and convening this conversation, but learning right alongside you about how we can embed more proactive and strategic initiatives within this new organization to make sure that we are taking full advantage of the diverse and multifaceted talents of the individuals that live in our region to help lead and make this region more productive. So that's my commitment to you. I know I speak for Greg as well. He can wave there if he's available to do so. A few things I want to just mention, because we've begun to take small steps within our organization. We are in the process, as we look for candidates, we are making sure that we're intentional about how we include an array of talents within our hiring pools. And we, like both Lori and Holly suggested, will be measuring that within our organization. So we are giving intentional thought to that as we look for volunteer roles and staff roles within this new organization. But we will be working closely with all of you that are on this call, and certainly with our partners, the Y and Welborn and Bridge, to make sure these next two events, I'll use the word elements of an initiative to quote Lori, are useful to you. Next time when we get together on July 14th, we want to really explore the environment in which our businesses are thriving. So how our local states set public policy, how they lead in the public policy space is central to how we are able to be good employers of our existing workforce, how we are able to help those that are in our community but not yet in our workforce make the connection so they are employees that are available to us in the future, and ultimately how we can grow the number of individuals that choose to live and work within your organizations in this part of our country, specifically the Evansville region. So that's on our radar, and you can count on these next two sessions being as useful and impactful as this one was. And again, I'm going to just cheer for the great work that's going on in our community. We heard from two global employers today who have been at this for a while. And there are equally good and impactful stories from many of our local organizations here in this community that each of you lead or influence. And so we look forward to highlighting and featuring those as we go. But I'm going to leave with a couple of thoughts. I love the concept of a must win or a must do. I think that is something that we can all embed in our organizations somehow in the very near future. So for me, that's a takeaway. And I'm going to thank Tom Salmon for kicking us off, because I think having an individual that has seen the benefit of this apparently in their recent earnings, so kudos to Berry Global and all you that are investors there, but that was a very tangible example of how this conversation is proving relevant, not just for the whole space of equity and shared prosperity that we wish for every individual that lives within this region, but also for those companies that we want to live and thrive in this region, because they're our employers. They're the fuel of this work we do. So we're in this business together. It's a joy and a pleasure to be working with so many of you on this conversation. And so my heartfelt thanks goes out to you, Lori, to you, Holly, to you, Pat, but most important to every one of you that's sitting on this call and listening closely, because how you are able to influence and take this work to the next level is the only reason we've asked your time today. So many thanks. We'll be in touch with you with lots of details about the July 14th event, but please mark your calendar for 7:30. God willing, this may be an opportunity for us to gather in person. If the numbers continue, we will keep that as an active option. So I look forward to seeing you all very soon. And please send any comments or advice or great suggestions or great examples of what's going on within your sphere of influence. And we'd love to make sure we do all we can to feature those and share them out. Thanks for being with us today. And I hope you have a great rest of your week and do something good in this conversation within your organization while you're thinking about what we talked about today.